Hello, folks. Welcome back to World War II TV and a rare Sunday show. And this is concluding the rather, in the end, a bit of a weird one, Arnhem week, because two guests end up not making it to the show. The second one, Krista Bergstrom, will be on later this month. I've made contact with him via a different email account. It seems to be good. So I've just rescheduled that, hopefully next Friday, I think. So that will be happening again. But today, we are looking at the role of the 101st Airborne, and particularly the 502nd Regiment, and particularly one company of the 502nd. It's based on, just reach across for it, this new book by my guest, From the Frying Pan to Mittersill, about the 502nd throughout World War II, but we are focusing on their role in Market Garden and on the island, so the area of the Netherlands that they were after the Battle of Market Garden kind of came to its conclusion. So I'm going to bring my guest in. Jos Groen has been on the show before talking about his first book, and I'm going to bring him in now. So good evening, Jos. How are you today?
Oh, I'm fine. I hope all our guests are also fine. So very nice of you to join us. And Paul and I have prepared the part of the 502nd and, to be precise, Fox Company in the Netherlands while they were there from September 17 until November 26, 1944.
Brilliant. So before we start the show, it's a sad week for both of us, particularly yourself, because you've just come back from the USA from Jim Martin's funeral. So I knew Jim, you knew Jim, and we talked about it on Twitter and social media that the door has just about closed on the World War II veterans now. Guy Whiddon passed away while you were in the USA at Jim Pee Wee Martin's funeral. So before we begin the presentation, how is it for someone like yourself? Your first book was about three of these guys, and and now they're not with us anymore. What are your feelings right now about the passing of this generation?
Yes. Maybe we could go to the presentation, Paul,
Yep.
and before just go a little down, more.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay, so yes, of course, this is, like you said, it's a very sad time, very sad week, and I think many of us who have World War II friends are in the same situation. It's they are passing away at an enormous rate. You see a picture in the middle, 2016, when I first met Jim, Dick Line, and Guy Whiddon, and as you said, Jim passed away on the 11th, to choosing a date, 9/11. And then Guy Whiddon, while I was in the US, the message came that Guy also passed away. And Dan McBride, he's the one that got me started into this book, Fox Company, after my first book, with all three stories of Jim, Dick, and Dan. I was so mesmerized also by Dan's stories that I started with this book, and I had high hopes of finishing it in time, so that Dan would also be able to, read the stories of his company and enjoy the stories. But yes, he passed away February 16 this year. So the book is there, but I didn't reach my goal that Dan was also able to read these stories. So yes, it's terrible. And it was a little bit all over again, because when I was in New Mexico for Dan's funeral, I also had a message of another paratrooper of the same company passing away, who had just turned 100 in November last year. And then, I received a message that Ed Manley had passed away in that week that I was in New Mexico. So, and 100 years old, like Jim, 101, of course, it's an incredible age, knowing that many of their comrades never made it, never had a family, never had a full life. But still, I think for all of us, we are saddened, when we lose our friends at the moment.
No, definitely, and it makes the work of people like yourself, and if I may say so myself, on this channel all the more important, because when the veterans are not there to speak personally, it'll be down to people to talk for them, and that's what your book has done. And that we both owe a debt in our careers to Mark Bando, the American historian who started work about the 101st Airborne. And Mark is very much about the people, what the recollections of the individuals, what were their experiences. And when it comes to Market Garden, there's so much debate about the plan, the unfolding of the plan, fault put with various commanders, and actually sometimes that takes attention away from the men within these units were just doing their jobs. They were dealing with a very dug in enemy in many cases, and I think that's what the focus will be tonight is the men of Fox Company and what their role was. So let's sort of crack on with the
Yes.
presentation. So
Yes.
there's a photo of the 502nd. So
yes, could you go one up? Could you go one up again so that we can see the? Okay, so like you said, it is what I also mentioned at Jim's funeral this week is. There are so many books about generals and units, and I told them, I'm interested in the story of the soldiers, and the boots on the ground. That is, and like Mark, that is what I like to do. I like to write those stories, and of course, in the book, you have to write the settings. So you have to sorry, there was something with my computer. You have to, write the environment that they are fighting in and the days and what maybe the regiment is doing or the division. But the focus for me is, like with Mark and several other authors, is on the paratroopers. So, and that is what I tried. And also with this book, I tried to write as much, all those personal stories. And so with the next picture, you see Fox Company in 1942, and it's already these are the interesting things because some have this picture as dated as 1943, but this picture has Captain Brill still as company commander, and there was a kind of a debate between him and the regimental commander during the stateside training because he was trying to get a rest for his men, and apparently the regimental commander thought they had to go on. So they had a debate and everybody heard it, and he was kicked out of the company, and that happened in 1942. So I kind of my guess is that the picture is made somewhere in August, September 1942, with Brill still in the middle. And what's also interesting is, if you would look very, very close, it's not probably good to see at this picture. There's only one guy on the front line standing with his normal shoes, and the rest is wearing their paratrooper boots. And that is Carson Durham. He's the second on the right. If you just look at the picture, second on the right from the officers. And he's the only one standing with his normal shoes. And he probably didn't have finished paratrooper school, but he went all the way with Fox Company until he unfortunately was killed on January 3 at Bastogne. So, but that's the interesting things sometimes, that this picture also tell you about, the paratroopers that were in the company.
Mm-hmm. So let's skip to the Market Gardens. So 78 years ago in September, as we know, it was fairly hastily put together, the operation. The 101st have the kind of the first job really, but for those who perhaps are less familiar with the 101st, who are more familiar with the British 1st Airborne Division, what summarize basically their objectives?
That is the bigger picture, and as I said, I'm more interested in this. But I know that, of course, that they had to capture a couple of bridges. The 501, I think, were closer to Veghel. And the 1st Battalion of 502 was at St. Oedenrode in the first day to capture the bridges there. And the 506, of course, as we all know from Band of Brothers, they were dropped close to Zon and had to go to Eindhoven to secure the bridges at Eindhoven. The interesting thing is, and that is when we come to Best, which was, an enormous battle for the 502nd. The interesting thing is, I read The Rendezvous with the Destiny today again, the epic book from Rappert and Norwood, and they tell you in the book that the 502nd went to Best, but that wasn't the initial, high for the higher echelon, the goal. But as you would look at the maps that I have, maybe we can show them already from the first one from Best, that you can see Best. Then you would see that there's a road leading from Best also to Eindhoven. And Taylor, of course, was ordered to take from Zon the road to Eindhoven, but he wanted to secure his flank over there. And he also wanted to have a second option to go to Eindhoven. So what you see is that from Best there is also a road leading to Eindhoven. So Taylor wasn't ordered to, but he had planned for himself to go to Best, and that was the 502nd that got the order. What is interesting is that it started just with a company. How company was ordered to go over there, and how company sent one platoon to secure one of the bridges at Best. In the end, they got in such a battle that not only 3rd Battalion was added to its forces at Best, but later also 2nd Battalion was ordered to Best because there were so many Germans. I read it, there were about 1,000 Germans already at Best, and they were having all positions at the road and at the canal over there. So that was one of the things that wasn't established, before they went over there. So there were, of course, stories that Montgomery did not, his intelligence should have given him some signals about the amount of Germans being around Arnhem. They thought at Best that there were hardly any Germans. Well, as it turned out, it was an enormous battle over there, and if you would see how many Fox Company men lost their lives, it was staggering.
No, definitely, and that's the point of why we're bringing you on, is that I think a lot of the viewers will be very aware of the 1st Airborne at Arnhem, and they'll be very aware of the big picture, and as you said earlier, they'll be aware of the 506th role, but I think the 502nd, possibly of the 3 regiments, not counting the glider guys, probably the most overlooked in the Battle of Market Garden, and yet there, as you said there, the fighting at Best was really important. So you talked a little bit about you want to get to the heart of the stories of the soldiers. Yes. It was a tribute to Dan McBride, who was in F Company. But I'll hand it back to you there. But for the 502nd genuine for Fox Company, this was coming fairly swiftly after the Normandy campaign. How had their period between the Normandy campaign and September gone? Were there lots of new recruits to phase into the company, or had they got a good core of people who'd survived the Normandy campaign?
Yes. There was also in September, I think, if I remember it well, or in August, there was an influx of replacements. I must say that after Bastogne, it was a lot more, because there it was even much more worse. Fox Company lost many men on January 3, not only killed in action, but about 35 paratroopers were prisoners of war. So there was, after Bastogne, there was an influx of much more replacements, but still after Normandy, there was also an amount, I don't know how many exactly, but there was an influx of replacements, yes.
Brilliant. But now we're going to come up to the first of the people you write about. And folks, the link to buying the book from the Flying Pencil website is in the description below. It's full of pictures, full of maps and things, but it's about the people. So here's our first 502nd F Company guys. So tell us who this is.
Yes, so this is Frank Marchese. He was one of the replacements. He came into the company in August, and what was interesting is that I'm in touch with his son, Frank Marchese Jr., and he provided me with a load of pictures that his father had made after his arrival in Fox Company. And so Mark Bendo has generously also given me many pictures that are, very well placed in the book with all the people that were in Fox Company. But Frank Marchese Jr. also provided me with a load of pictures that his father had made. And if you go to the next slide, you can see a couple of those, and the ones that you see are made either at the Alsace or in France after they went over there from Austria. But, in between there were so many pictures that, that really matched the story. So as of the Netherlands, Bastogne and the Alsace. So that was, very nice of Frank also to give the pictures and to have me use them for the book. So that was a wonderful thing. And then you see Frank Marchese. He spent all his life in the army until he retired. But what is interesting is that if you go to the next slide, is he was already wounded the first day or the second day in the Netherlands, and so exactly 3 years later, while he was at Fort Bragg in the 82nd, he received this Dutch medal, the Dutch medal for valor. And you see the certificate, which was signed up by the Dutch Queen Wilhelmina of Orange. And he was handed this by the ambassador in the US at the time. So that was one of the things that his son Frank gave to me, and it's also in the appendix of the book that I show this. And Frank Marchese spent all his life in the army, a very respectable non-commissioned officer, and that is why I also mentioned this throughout the book. And in the final chapter, I describe Frank's total life from until he passes away. So those are the things that that is what I really like, is that also in the last chapter I go back to several of the paratroopers of the company and what happened after the war with them. And Frank is one of them that I remember in the final chapter.
Well, that's one of the things I liked about your book is that, as I said at the beginning introduction, we've done lots of debates about Market Garden as an overview, and they will continue because historians love debating the Gavin at Nijmegen and the 508th and Urquhart at Arnhem. But actually, as we said earlier, bringing in the stories of people who haven't been told before, and people like Marchese as a soldier whose story had not been really covered before, and you can bring those stories to life. So we'll move on then. Yes. We'll build up to the to D-Day. So this is the Market Garden D-Day. So I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah. So what is also interesting, of course, paratroopers, they were very well trained, and they were also ships. I'm looking for that word, not right but discipline. There was of course also a lot of discipline. But I also know that Jim Martin had some of these moments that you want to let off steam. And some of them, do it in an innocent way, and some of them, just go AWOL. And just before, they were heading off to the Netherlands. Apparently, 3 men, Jacobsen, Private First Class Jacobsen, and Tetrio, and Private Romchek went AWOL, and they were already in a marshalling area, because if you look at the roster, this is from September 15, and so they probably jumped over the fence and went AWOL. Now Jacobsen and Tetrio returned on time, and Romchek, if you go to the next slide, it seems that he failed, because Romchek is from AWOL to duty on September 17, 1400 hours, and there is an after action report from the regimental commander, Chapuis, and in the after action report, he writes that they took off from where they were at 10:25 hours. So it seems that Romchek just missed the flight to the Netherlands.
Wow.
Yeah, but I know he was there, so I don't know how he returned. But because later he was mentioned in the daily morning reports. But yeah, it seems like Romchek, and on another page of the morning report, he is also mentioned to be in the stockade. So I think that he, one way or the other, he was brought across the channel, and later came back to the company. But if you look at the timings, I think he just barely missed the flight to the Netherlands. So no second combat star for John on his wings.
And that's a fascinating story, because I think it suggests how swiftly Market Garden happened, because you talked about it yourself. These paratroops, they want to fight. They've got an incredible esprit de corps. They are they're motivated to defeat Hitler. The fact that 2 or 3 of them go AWOL is because clearly they weren't expecting anything to happen those few days. They've just probably hopped over the wire to go and see a girl, go and get drunk, whatever it would be. And in this particular case, one poor guy misses the jump just because he was over the wire. But it does, I think, suggest how quickly his plan came together. And with the Normandy jump, of course, everybody knew something was building for the last 2 or 3 weeks before. But with Market Garden, it was it was very, very sudden, but that's an amazing story. But I'll hand it back to you and we'll move on. So so September the 17th, Market Garden.
One of the things that what you mentioned, what might be the case, is that there were also operations being cancelled just before Market Garden. There were 2 other operations which were cancelled at the last detail, at the last moment, and they might have thought, the other ones were cancelled, and let's head for it and have some fun. But Romcheck seemed to be too late. But okay, so on D-Day, September 17, a very nice day in the Netherlands, very beautiful day, and a daylight jump, which D-Day in Normandy was a night jump, but this was in broad daylight.
Are you still there, Jos? Your image froze. Well, here we go, folks. The problems of live streams again. Jos seems to have frozen there. Let me check what's going on. Is it my end? No, I don't think it's my end. Okay, folks, I'll just drop him out. Hopefully he'll come back in again. Here we go. I'll keep on talking while we're doing so. Just while we're waiting for Jos to come back in, don't forget Channel Irons at War Week starts tomorrow. We're going to show about the Atlantic Wall on Omaha Beach, on Jersey, sorry, tomorrow. So that would be a great show. I'm just going to try and hope what's going on here. Yeah, he's just restarting. Okay. So so I'll just remind you while we got talking. So Jos's book, I'll hold it up again. It's from the same publisher who did the book about the bombing of in advance of Market Garden. So from the frying pan to Middellis is in English. I should point out this one definitely is in English. It's packed with photos, really good. Just wait for Jos to come back in. While we're waiting, folks, I just want to say thank you to all the new patrons you've had recently. It's always fantastic. And did you see the show from World War II, Time Ghost, their D-Day travels? I did some filming. That's why I was for a week. I was filming with Time Ghost, Indy, and Spartacus for their big D-Day special next June. So check their YouTube page because they were filming with me, and they put their first thing up last week. But yeah. Great Dominion saying the Arnhem week under a cloud. Yeah, something has really gone wrong. It's the wireless communications has been really weird this week, but at least Krista Bergstrom is coming back again next week. So hopefully Jos will be back in again soon. Time Ghost is the team. So one word, Time Ghost. Indy Nidell and Spartacus Olsen run the channel. It's a massive one. It's 750,000 subscribers. So have a check for that, Lorelei. But we'll be back. I'm sure Jos will be back in a minute. Just something crashed there. We'll see. And but meanwhile, thank you for being patient with everything as it goes wrong sometimes, because that is the fact about live streams, is sometimes they don't go perfectly. Just to remind you, after the Channel Irons week, which is this week, I'm going to do a catch-up week where I'm going to try and put together all the people whose shows got cancelled for various technical reasons. So there's John Bruning coming back on to talk about Race of Aces. Will Iredale and Phil will be on to talk about the Kamikaze Hunters. Hopefully I'll get that one sorted out. Krista Bergstrom to come back on and do his Lost Victory Arnhem. So I'm going to use the week after to kind of get those shows back on that had to be postponed or cancelled for various technical gremlins. So that'll be the point of that week. And then after that, we go into, I'm just checking what we've got after that. It will be another week of kind of odd ones. We've got Al Murray joining us talking about his book Command. Mary Louise Roberts is talking about her book Sheer Misery. Alan Allport is coming on the next week. And Jeffrey Cox, who did that wonderful show about the Battle of Java Sea, is coming on talking about the Battle of Cape Esperance. And hopefully Robert Kershaw is going to be on to talk about his new book, The German Point of View, about the Battle of Dunkirk. Then after that, it's 8th Air Force Week. That starts on October 17th. And then after that, it's 2 weeks devoted to El Alamein. So hopefully, Jos will come back in again now.
I hear you. Do you see me?
I don't see you, no. I can hear you, though. But I can definitely hear you, though. So can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you. You only hear only, but you don't hear me.
I can hear you. Yeah, I just can't see you. But
Yeah, that's why doesn't the camera? Because it says start camera, and then I don't come up. So that's kind of strange. And I looked at the settings, and everything seems to be, you know, camera.
okay. Well, the main thing is we
No,
can hear you, so we'll
yeah,
carry on if that's okay with you. So we got to
yeah,
we
I'm
got
fine.
September the
I'm fine.
17th being daylight, and hopefully your camera will start again.
Yep, yep. So yeah, we you know, there was a daylight jump, and you see you see at the map where Fox Company or at least the 502nd landed. You know, a drop zone Bravo, maybe Baker in World War II NATO language. The first battalion went to St. Oedenrode, and like I said before, you know, Howe Company was sent to Best, and they thought, you know, with just one company that would do the trick. But you know, Howe Company run in so much Germans and so much resistance that later that evening, around 1800, the 3rd Battalion was sent there with the other companies, George, Item, and the headquarter company. So they went over there and tried to get in contact with Howe Company, which apparently wasn't easy to find them in the dark later. But so that was the first day, you know, 1st Battalion at St. Oedenrode, and the 3rd Battalion at Best, and the 2nd Battalion was in reserve. So, you know, the fighting went on, and so the next day, 2nd Battalion was also in the morning. Chapuis, who was at the time, was still the battalion commander of 2nd Battalion, got the order to go to Best, and I think it was around 8 that they were ordered to go, and so he went to Best and was at the right flank later that day of 3rd Company, 3rd Battalion. So, and that is, you know, when there was an enormous battle for the 18th and the 19th, you know, both days. They were fighting the Germans, trying to get a foothold. At Best, they managed to have a roadblock on the road, and that hampered the Germans to add extra troops or to send troops to Eindhoven. But they never really managed, and that is what in the Rendezvous with Destiny it says, that, you know, they conquered the town, but after the 502nd left on the 20th in the morning, Best, there was still fighting going on at Best, and Best was only taken somewhere in October by the English, but at least the 18th and the 19th, there were 2 days of enormous fighting for 2nd and 3rd Battalion at Best. And if you would, and that is, you know, where those personal stories come in for me. If you would go to the next slides, 19th, and then you know, the next slides, and that is, you know, it was really you know, a battle, and Fox Company lost on the 18th. They lost 4 paratroopers. So I don't have a photo of Sergeant Storino, but I do have these 3 troopers. Lieutenant Owen, at the right, Lieutenant Shills at the middle, and let me just quickly check. And that Joseph Sanger is on the left. So that day there were 3 troopers killed in action, but the next day there were even 7 troopers killed in action, and 2 died of their wounds 2 days later. So there were 13 in 2 days. 13 men were killed in action, you know, just at Best. So that was, of course, yeah, tragic for the company. At the same time, you know, not only all these men were killed in action, but they lost 7 men wounded in action on the first day and 30 on the second day. And several would never return to the company. In December, in one of the morning reports in December, you could see that, for instance, that Private First Class Erdepak and Private Froland were sent back to the US. And at the same time, also the company commander, Lex Johnson, was also sent back to America. And that is one of the more famous stories, I think, because it is also in the book A Bridge Too Far by Cornelius Ryan, had a story how Lex Johnson's life was saved by Sergeant Doan, because Doan went to the hospital to see his commander, how he was doing, and he discovered that Johnson was on the death pile. And that's, I think I have the picture of Lex Johnson on the next slide. Oh, no, sorry, that's okay. So this is Shield, yeah, and that's what I still also wanted to add, that he got posthumously the Silver Star Medal, and he was already married and had a little son back home, Nick Jr. And Nick received his father's Silver Star on August the 3rd, 1945, which is a newspaper article that I discovered, and you can see how Nick Jr. received that Silver Star Medal posthumously from his father. So yeah, that was kind of sad, of course. And then it's Lex Johnson, and that's of course the famous story from A Bridge Too Far, that Lex Johnson was wounded. He was initially wounded in his shoulder, quite a wound, and he was later at I say that a place where they would assemble with the wounded, but he kept sending away the troopers because he said, okay, it's okay with me. Okay. And by the time that he was laid on a jeep to be evacuated, the Germans were firing with machine guns, and he was hit in the head. And that was, of course, a severe wound that was the reason why the surgeon didn't want to operate him. But yeah, Doan found him, discovered that he was still breathing, brought him inside, and put a Luger at the head of the surgeon, and told him to operate Johnson. And that is how Johnson survived the war. He went home, had a good life, became a manager with a truck company. And the interesting story was that, he couldn't read like we do normally, looking straight at a book. He had to look sideways because his eye view was only sideways. Right. And that was the way how he read. But he also was apparently possible to play golf, his daughter told me. So, Johnson had a good life, passed away in Florida many years later. And
also worth mentioning, Jos, that unlike in the movie, where in the movie, the implication is that it's Johnson's first combat jump because he's nervous. He's having that conversation in a tent with Sergeant Doan, played by James Caan. And the implication is he's never been in combat before. But Johnson was a Normandy veteran. He earned a Silver Star in Normandy, didn't he? So the movie really gets Johnson's story in terms of the background wrong, doesn't it?
Totally wrong. Yes, of course. Johnson was with the company already in America, and he was there when Brill, when Brill was kicked out. Johnson was already there. He was at the same march, and at the time he was given the lead. But then another captain came in, Rudolph Jones, and became the company commander, and not very well liked by the men, by the way. That's another story in the book. But so he was there, and he jumped with the company in Normandy, and as you said, he got the Silver Star for Quarantaine, where he helped by attracting the tanks that were coming from the beach forces. That that he was helping them to deroute a little bit and to help his company that was almost surrounded by the Germans at the time, and that's part of the Normandy chapter, of course. It's not the Dutch chapter, but yes, Johnson was he's a combat leader, combat experienced.
I mean, and it's just worth mentioning, not that we're talking about movies, is that we know about the fame due to E Company 506th and Dick Winters, his journey from Normandy and then Market Garden, and then becoming eventual acting battalion commander, and so on and so forth. But there we go. We can see you again now. Brilliant. But with someone like Johnson, he is known solely really by the general public for that scene in A Bridge Too Far where he's wounded. And it's a really bad representation of a hero who served his country in 2 campaigns. And as you say, had a rewarding life, because they never come back, that story in the film. They never finish off. They never have that bit like you just said, that he went on, he survived the war. It's my least favorite bit of Bridge Too Far, that sequence. And I imagine if I'm like yourself, who has studied Fox Company, I would be even more annoyed with that scene because there's so much of the story it misses out.
Yeah, and I think he's a sort, like you said, portrayed as scared, and I don't think Johnson was really scared. He might have a little, and that's what Dan McBride also said. I was always scared, but it helped me survive the war. And so a little bit of those things, of course, is important, and not to be over enthusiastic to go into war. But yeah, Johnson, he was a seasoned commander when he jumped into Normandy. So yeah, that was totally wrong.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'm glad we've cleared that up, and I think it's an important story. So let's move on. There's lots more stories to do.
Yeah, well, and that's one of those interesting aspects, about war and how things sometimes work. And like I said, at best, there were so many men wounded already, and like Johnson, but also probably other non-commissioned officers. So there was a story by Emmett Parmley, who was one of the privates in the company, and he remembered that at best, Roland Fair took over the role of commander. And the interesting thing is that Roland Fair was one of those guys like Bromchek that sometimes, tried to do some other things to relieve the pressure a little bit, probably because he seemed to have been demoted and promoted. So that's also something that Emmett Parmley says. I'm not sure what his rank was at the time because, that kept changing once in a while. But Roland was just at the beginning also promoted to corporal, so that wasn't known for Emmett, of course, because that was in the morning papers, morning reports. But at the time when the fighting at best was going on, he was just promoted to corporal. And so best and at best, Roland Fair took it over, and that was the interesting aspect that Emmett said, and I will look at the text in the book. And he says, in desperate situations, usually some person takes over. On this day, it was our former First Sergeant Roland Fair. Well, what about ranks? I don't know what his rank was, or if he had any at the time, for he was a private mostly. His only weapon this day was a British Webley Army pistol and his bullhorn voice. He constantly exposed himself, waving that big revolver with a ring in the butt like he was going to throw it at someone. His girlfriend in England had given it to him. So that was Roland, trying to get order, in a chaotic situation with no leadership around him. And that's, what I particularly like in these stories. And of course, we should also be grateful to George Koskimaki, because this was in one of the letters that Emmett Parmley sent to George Koskimaki. And for the listeners and viewers that know, of course, the 101, George wrote 3 epic books about the 101. And at the time, and before long before the internet, he was sending out letters all over America to former paratroopers of the division to ask for information about, their part in Normandy, in the Netherlands, and at Bastogne. So, and Emmett Parmley wrote him a couple of letters, and in one of his letters, Emmett described this situation with Roland Fair. And so in the book also, Roland orders Emmett to go to Lieutenant Atkins. Lieutenant Atkins was before the Netherlands, he was within in Fox Company. I think, no, just before Normandy, he was sent out to the headquarters company and wasn't with Fox Company in Normandy, but he was still with the headquarters company. And so Roland sends him over, Emmett Parmley, to get some machine guns because he was probably the platoon commander of the machine gun platoon. So Emmett comes back, with no extra guns, if you read the book. And at the time, they were overwhelmed by the Germans because, they were getting into this big battle with the Germans. So Emmett comes back with the story that Atkins couldn't give him any machine guns. And that is where Emmett says, this is when Roland Fair again took charge of the situation. With his bullhorn force, he directed the withdrawal back to our original line. We departed from that morning. We expected a counterattack, which is one of the usual things with Germans, in battle. And Fair had us dug in. So they were, after this battle and knowing that they couldn't progress, the best thing they thought was probably going back to the line where they already were, which was a strong line. And Fair had them dug in over there, to prevent the Germans to have at least a successful counterattack. So, that is one of those really, wonderful personal stories that I really like. And Roland Fair, he did his thing. So, yep.
And so how would, in terms of, for those who are less familiar with the role of the 2nd Battalion in Market Garden around Best, that September 18th, 19th, 20th period, what was the main function of Fox Company there? Was it holding a position? Was it advancing? Was it a bit of everything? Was it a very confused situation?
Like I said, you see that Fair had to take it over, and it was of course very confusing because there were two battalions fighting over there, and it was a bitter battle. Some of you may know that Lieutenant Colonel Cole got killed over there, who was the receiver of a Medal of Honor, not for the fighting at best, but because of the bayonet charge at the Inku farm in Normandy, close to Quarantaine. But Cole was killed over there, so there you have one thing, the 3rd Battalion was beheaded, lost their commander, and Stopka had to take over, and the same thing here with Fox Company, of course. Lieutenant Hendricks had to take over in the middle of the battle the role of the company commander because Johnson was wounded, and that is probably what happened everywhere in all those squads and all those platoons. There were so many officers also lost, junior leaders, lieutenants. So yeah, it was of course chaos sometimes those 2 days, and still, they managed to keep the Germans away. And if you would look at the books, and it's described in Rendezvous with Destiny, is that everything which worked out at Eindhoven was also possible because the decision to send 2nd Battalion and 3rd Battalion to Best, because they were drawing in so many Germans to battle the 502nd at Best, and they never got anywhere. And it also meant that at other locations where the main mission was at Eindhoven to get the British in, that was possible because the 502nd managed to stop the Germans at Best. So the decision from Taylor to send on his own ID the 502nd to Best, that helped also reaching out his main mission at Eindhoven and going forward on Hell's Highway.
But you made a good point there, Jos, in that because it's not the main mission, because the main mission is keeping Hell's Highway through Eindhoven open, is that I feel the role of this part of the 502nd, 2nd Battalion and 3rd Battalion has been rather overlooked because it's a secondary mission, but it's, as you said there, a vital secondary mission because it's keeping Germans occupied elsewhere who could be trying to bisect or reclaim Hell's Highway further up it. So there's only so much you can talk about in a single volume book about Operation Market Garden. Obviously, yours is about one company, but the single volume books are trying to cover everything. They end up having to focus on those main battles, and the peripheral battles like this one end up not being covered. So I'm really grateful that you're covering it today. So we'll keep on moving. So the First Sergeant Earl Cox.
Yes. Well, what is interesting, of course, is what I think also is. Sorry, I'm myself, of course, a military, and I'm of course very much interested in all these soldiers' stories. What is interesting is that after Best, Fox Company seemed to be just taken away from all the battles. And so that's also war, is that you one day you're in a heck of a fight around Best, losing all these men, and then you are sent to St. Oedenrode, and of course they had patrols over there. They were part of the beginning of the attack at Schijndel, where they were from St. Oedenrode trying to get to the north to Schijndel, and Fox Company was also in that, but at the same time. 3rd Platoon, which was Dan McBride's platoon, and Dan and I were good friends, and Cox had the diary, and so from the diary I learned that at least Fox Company, the 3rd Platoon, was for 4 days at the division command post, protecting that. So like 3rd Platoon of Dan, they were for 4 days at the headquarters and didn't see probably any action. And so from being in the thick of the fight at Best, the first 3 days, and on the 20th going to St. Oedenrode, and 3rd Platoon suddenly was for 4 days over there, and that must have been an enormous change. And that is something that you, I think, also maybe hardly read in any of the books, because of course it doesn't gain much attention because there's nothing, worthy writing about being at the company headquarters or the division headquarters if nothing happens. But that was also an important task, of course, for the soldiers to do, because the headquarters, of course, had to be protected. So that is interesting with Cox's diary, and I had that diary also for Mark, because Mark had a copy of it, which was very, also again, very grateful that he shared it with me. And then Sergeant Cox had from Holland and Bastogne every day, and it was sometimes only small notes, but he would write all these things that the company was in, and sometimes even the platoons. Like I said, he wrote that Dan's platoon was for 4 days at the headquarters. So that is interesting, and that is also what you see. If I go to my own preparations, is that as of the 23rd, you see that the company was most of the time ducking at St. Oedenrode, and the first period they were ducking in the north, and then they were sent to the west, and they were ducking a couple of days over there, and then they went to the north again, back to the north, also ducking in their positions over there, but they weren't in the thick of the fight anymore. But there was a big fight, and that is probably, if I'm right, is the next slide. You can see, of course, that the Germans did, of course, try to catch, or to capture Hell's Highway, and that was close to where they were, because 502nd, they saw them coming, the German troops trying to cut Hell's Highway, and that happened on the 24th. But again, Fox Company wasn't in that, but that's one of the important moments at that period, that Fox Company was in a more quiet setting, that they did cut Hell's Highway close to St. Oedenrode, a little bit more, I think it was to Veghel, in the direction of Veghel, and the 502nd, but not, again, Fox Company tried to hamper that attack, and do a counterattack, but that failed. And so for 44 hours, the Germans managed to close down Hell's Highway, which was, of course, very important and not so good for the overall Operation Market Garden to get to Arnhem. So that is something that happened in that period. So that is why I mention it. It's also in the book. I describe it in the book that it happened, because it's, like I said, it is, of course, for the Germans, it was a big success. But Fox Company wasn't in there, because they were, on other positions at the time at St. Oedenrode.
But that is worth mentioning, because when we talk about the Germans breaking the Hell's Highway, we did a show on World War II TV about a year ago with Edwin, and Joris did that show for us. There is that the nature of the 101st by September 22nd, 23rd is they're spread over quite a large area, and not everybody, as you said, can be in the hot spot. Some are in the bit that becomes the quiet spot. But if they had put everybody to one position, it wouldn't have worked. You have to defend everything you've taken. So it's that interesting fact, again, that the focus of a lot of historians is on where these hotspots were, but the weakness of the 101st positions was they haven't got enough people in these spots when it all kicks off around them. So the fact that Fox Company weren't in the hotspot is interesting in its own right, because it shows you how thinly they were spread. And another thing I want to ask you, Jos, is in those periods when, for example, they were guarding divisional headquarters, have you any idea within Fox Company how many of them had knowledge of how the operation was going ahead of them? I mean, we know now when we look at the Market Garden timeline, we know what's going. We can see all the various movements on the maps. But if you're someone like Dan McBride on September 21st, 22nd, do you have any idea how the operation is going anywhere else? Or do you just literally know what you're doing yourself?
No. That's one thing that one of the soldiers mentioned also in a letter to George Koskimaki, and I'm trying to find that in my document, that Fergus at one time writes to George Koskimaki about that, and he just said the same thing what Dan McBride says, about Normandy. He had the same thing, that after the first 2 or 3 days, that he lost totally track of what happened, and Fergus wrote that also to Koskimaki. So I'm sorry I can't find that really quickly, but he said the same thing. So it's in the book, and of course the regular soldier, they did their job, And sometimes they didn't even know which town they were. They were just in a foxhole, and they were making a new foxhole and going from one foxhole to the other and just doing what they were ordered. And where they were, which town or what date, sometimes, it was a blur of activities for them.
Brilliant. Thanks. Great response. So let's move on a bit. We're going back to the Earl Cox diary. So as you say, the Germans broke Hell's Highway for 44 hours, and then there was
Yes.
they pushed back and they reclaimed the highway, although there's problems further up at Nijmegen. But bring it back to what Fox Company are up to at this point.
Yes, because like I said, they were around St. Oedenrode, and that was until October the 3rd. What was also one of the things that is in his diary from Earl Cox is, a job that nobody is really, of course, waiting for. But at the same time, when they were at St. Oedenrode, 2 of the men were sent back to Best from Fox Company to identify the KIAs, the killed in actions at Best. That was one of the things he mentioned in his diary. It's just a little task, but if you look at the significance with the amount of troopers that were killed at Best, that was not really a wonderful job to do. Of course, somebody had to do it, but 2 guys were sent over there. So that's one of those things in his diary. And so so he describes like I said, that they were at the west and back to the north. And then finally, on October 3rd, when they are again at the north, they were ordered to go to Bergendal. And you see that just at, the east side of Nijmegen. You see a little dot that I added to the map from Bergendal. And that is where they went after that time at St. Oedenrode. They had some rest and recuperation over there. And then the whole, period at the island starts. And also for many familiar with the actions at the island, that was a period of patrolling, being in foxholes, but also enormous amount of artillery shells fired by the Germans, who were on the opposite side of the river, and they were on the high ground around Wageningen, and they could easily see what happened on the island. And so every move by daylight, and they were warned by the English, who they replaced in the area. And the English already warned them, from don't go out by daylight because the Germans see everything. And the first thing you get when you walk around by daylight is that you're shelled. And, some learned it the hard way, like Taylor, who was wounded when he visited Decline at his post. But yeah, many were shelled when they started moving on daylight. So that is the story at the island. And there you see the next slide. You can see, and that is also described in the last first sergeant, that there's also a great book by Leighton Black, who was one of the first sergeant in the 502nd. And he describes the same thing that you see in Cox's diary, is that, the guys were having a rotation schedule within the company and also within the battalion and the regiment. And what happened, at least with 2nd Battalion, is that, the guys from Fox Company were on the line for a couple of days, mostly 3 or 4 days at Hien, which was their area, and WWII, which you see a little bit to the west of Hien on the map. And then they were sent in reverse to the west of that little town, Andelst. And then after a couple of days, they went into a barn and had some rest and relief. And then they were sent back on the line again. And that, that rotation schedule, that was since their arrival at Hien, at the island, that was what was ongoing all the time. And so patrolling, and making sure that the Germans couldn't infiltrate, because also if you look at Cox's diary, there are several mentioning that the Germans were really close by, that they even heard the hobnails of the Germans on the road, walking on the road. So that's also described in his diary. So, it was even until the end, they had to stay alert because the Germans would be there, and it was very dangerous. And that is what you see with Ben Schaub. Ben Schaub was the last man that lost his life in the Netherlands, and that story is in the book. That they were patrol, they were at a house, and Joe Pistone, one of the well-known men of Fox Company, said, "Don't go in. The house is booby-trapped." But Ben saw something that caught his attention. He saw a very beautiful dagger in the house, and he threw a rope around it and thought of, getting that knife, but he stepped at the door, he stepped probably on a mine and was wounded. And then another soldier tried to take him away, and that soldier also stepped on a mine. And that is where Ben was hurt at the head, which was his second wound, and that one was fatal. And so he died a couple of days. But in the same time, and that is also what you see in the book, he was able to write a letter. At least he wasn't writing it. Somebody in the hospital wrote a letter for him because he couldn't write himself. But just in those days, he could write a letter home to his parents. So that must have been, something that, also after receiving the telegram that he was killed, that must have been something for the family to receive, at least that final letter from him.
Mm. And what was the morale like within the company at this period? Because everybody by now knows that Market Garden has been, depending on which historian's point of view, either a complete failure or 90% successful, but certainly it hasn't fulfilled all its objectives. You're now, as you said, on the island. You're being shelled almost continuously by the enemy. It's starting to be, it's certainly wet. It's starting to get colder. You're paratroops. You're not really meant to be sitting in the line doing nothing. Your job is to go in, do your job, come out again. So did you, in talking to the guys and reading the letters, was morale a problem at this point? Did the men in the company not really understand what their job was at this point?
Well, Demek Wright, if you've ever spoken with him, he was quite outspoken also about things, and about, how he think when something was a good job or not so good. And he mentioned about the period then when he was wounded, because he had his second Purple Heart. He would have his third Purple Heart when he was at Bastogne, but when he got his second Purple Heart when he was wounded at the ankle, he mentioned that was one of those useless patrols on the island. So that was, then telling how he felt about that period at the island, patrolling all the time, but they didn't gain anything, and it was just doing patrols and just make sure that you wouldn't be wounded or killed. I know that Dan thought about it that way. I didn't see that in the letters that somebody was that outspoken about the situation, but then he was, he didn't think high of what happened at the island. It wasn't very gloryful in his memory.
Well, I mean, it's completely understandable because, again, a lot of the Market Garden books, they kind of end with the either the British pulling out of Arnhem or Operation Pegasus and the rescue of the British army, and they kind of end it there. But there is this, yes, as you said, there's this phase where it goes into October, into November, where the front has kind of stabilized now to some extent. The advances have stopped, but there you are a paratrooper. You're meant to be going in, getting a job done, and you're sitting in this. It's miserable. I've been there in September and October, and the wind howls across there. You're exposed. The damp from the ground there. It must have been pretty miserable time. So
yes, they were there for 2 months, and it's in between those big rivers. And once they started making foxholes, normally you would like to have a foxhole where you can at least stand in, but with maybe your head above the ground. But after a couple of feet in that area, the water sips up because of the high rivers, and so they were always standing in water in their foxhole, and it got worse and worse, of course, with all the rain. So that was, of course, a terrible moment. The thing is that if you read the last first sergeant, that they were trading about a place that they would go in, and one of the guys wanted to be in the house with his squad, and Leighton Black, he preferred to be outside because he knew that the house would be, the target of the Germans all the time, because it was, of course, very visible. And that other sergeant didn't understand that, so he gave him the first choice, and he chose the house. And Leighton never said that to him, but he knew it, and he was happy because they didn't have any shell, where they were in the orchard for a couple of days. So, and that was happening all the time, and of course that the morale will be negatively, if you're doing all this patrol that leads to nothing, and you're being shelled continuously, by the Germans. You have that bad rain, in the Netherlands in the time. yeah, it must have been not very gloriful, and not, the guys mustn't they probably were not happy anymore.
No, definitely. But we'll keep on moving. And you mentioned Parmley earlier on, so tell us about this
Yeah.
slide.
Well, that's the interesting one. Of course, some were very unfortunate, like Ben being killed over there. But Emmert, what we say, he was lucky while he was not so lucky, because he at the moment he was ordered to pick up the machine gun that was standing outside, and he picked it up. But normally you would not do it at the barrel. So I don't know why he did it, but maybe he was tired, or it was just a moment that he didn't thought about that. But he picked up the machine gun at the barrel, and suddenly a shot went off. So one of his fingers was also shot off his hand. So he was quite severely wounded, and so he was taken away. The lucky thing, so to say, is what we say. It's losing a finger is of course not a pleasure. But by that wound, he didn't went to Bastogne, and he only returned somewhere in March, if I remember that well. So he missed Bastogne totally, and that might have either saved his life, or maybe some cold injuries. So yeah. Just close to, because at the 26th they are moving out. Just 2 weeks before that, Emmert got the wound, and that was when he was taken away, and he missed Bastogne. So yeah, some fortune in that situation.
So we've got the slide up there. So they were there a full 2 months and a few days. They head off to Mourmelon, and then, as we know, the period for the 101st next is some of the officers have leave, some they're patching up their wounds. There's more replacements during the company for those lost generally, and then obviously we'll do cover Bastogne in a future episode. But within 3 weeks, the Ardennes offensive starts and it all kicks off again. But to bring the Market Garden and the Ireland period to a conclusion, in terms of Fox Company. So it starts, the summary is the first 3 days of really intense fighting around Best, 13 men killed, numerous others wounded. So that's sort of 10% of their strength gone in the first few days. Then that period of confusion. Then they're out of the line a bit. Then they're kind of not quite in the main bit when the Hills Highway is cut. And then it skips to this sitting on the island in miserable foxholes for several weeks. So it's easy. I can understand in writing a book that it might be tempting to just kind of do Normandy and Bastogne and kind of skip this bit, because it's not like the F Company 502nd had this incredible action that saved the day or was a pivotal one for historians. But I think the fact they didn't have that action is what makes the story interesting, is that everybody was doing something somewhere, and every job was part of the operation. And some jobs are very exciting and glamorous, and some jobs aren't exciting and glamorous. But as you made it clear, men are still being killed, men are still being wounded. So how would you summarize the campaign for Fox Company?
I think you did it very well. I think, like you said, that of course that battle at Best was of course enormous, and of course it saved what many probably are not aware of. It saved that main operation, and in those first days that that was possible at Eindhoven. Yeah, and then later on there were all those small tasks where they were still fighting at St. Oedenrode also, but not in the same way anymore as Best. And so it may look like that what we say is if the candle was already blown out in a certain way. But no, of course they were doing their things. It was still, you had to be careful. There were Germans all around you. If you read the stories in the book, of course there I can't tell everything, but they still had engagements with Germans everywhere, and guys were wounded. Or guys were, at least you see on the island that Ben Schaub was killed. It wasn't in a battle, but the danger of mines, were everywhere. And there's other stories, also that the guys were in. That Emmett Parmley was almost in a situation with the patrol that he was almost hit by their own fire. So yeah, that it may not seem like much happened, but all those patrols were there, that was still pretty dangerous situations. So yeah,
and
they were in the thick of the fight.
And as you said, Jos, people's morale is dropping, and when their morale is dropping, fatigue is setting in. You know, you had a long career in the military. If you're 2 months on the front line, doesn't matter how good you are, towards the end of those 2 months, you're starting to you're tired. You're not functioning at your full security. You're going to make the odd mistake. You drop your guard a little bit just because fatigue kicks in. I think although in some ways the paratroopers had it easier than some of the infantry units that were in the line. You know, think about the units in the Hurtgen Forest for months on end. So the paratroopers had it less bad than those guys. But even so, 2 months in the line at the sharp end, it's going to start wearing people down.
Absolutely, absolutely. Like I said, with that rotation schedule, you know, you were given like 4 days, of course, away from the front line, but you're still, you know, that close. You know, it's not like you're 20 miles or 30 miles, you know, that you are away from the front line. You know, it's just a matter of maybe a mile or something. So still the shells, you know, were coming in, and so it's relatively rest, but you know, of course the guys were tensed. You know, the tension was high, and that is why you maybe see that Ben Schaub made that decision, and maybe that Parmley made that decision to pick up the gun, what you normally wouldn't do. You know, you never you pick up a gun at the barrel, but he did it, you know, and lost a finger. So, you know, all those things show you, of course, also that, and we know from what they also told, you know, that they were really, really looking forward to some rest. And then, you know, when they were having a little time off, you know, and some were going to Paris, you know, having a break, or at Reims, close to Moulin. And then suddenly, of course, at 16 December, the Germans decided to attack at the Ardennes. And, you know, it was all over again. You know, they were, of course, raced to Bastogne. And, yeah, you know, it's incredible. It's still incredible knowing what these men had to endure, you know, in a matter of, you know, what was it, like half a year or something, you know, from jumping on June 6th at D-Day in Normandy, and then, you know, at January 3, when Fox Company was hit again enormously with also Dog Company of 2nd Battalion at Longchamps, at Bastogne, you know, and in just a matter of time. What is it? You know, that's why I have such an enormous respect for these men, and that is why I want to write the stories of these men.
Well, that's you've anticipated my final question. Really, is that it's important. I'll hold up the book again. That although the book does cover the exciting moments, the D-days, the moments, the Fourth Armored arrived in Bastogne at the end of it, you know, those moments of high spots, but you also cover the down spots. You cover that period on the island that we've just talked about tonight. You know, in that this hasn't been the most a show about the seizing of bridges and the defending of bridges. It's about just men doing a job that's part of a greater operation. And I think, you know, the island period definitely gets some short shrift. It doesn't get enough attention. People leap straight from the conclusion of Market Garden straight to the Ardennes offensive, and they forget that a lot of these guys, I mean, let's talk about the British units that are moving into the island as well, because the 49th West Riding Division move in there and have a difficult win. 43rd Wessex are up there. So that period of holding the line in that wet terrain there is an overlooked period. But my final question is kind of really, what are your hopes for the book? I mean, obviously to tell the stories of the individuals, but beyond that, any particular hopes for the book?
Oh, well, you know, of course, I would love if they make a Band of Brothers out of it, but, you know, my contacts with Steven Spielberg aren't that well, or Tom Hanks. So, you know, I don't think I will get a letter. But yes, you know, of course, I would love that people would buy the book. I've noticed that with the other book, 3 of the Last World War II Screaming Eagles, that it's very difficult to get attention in the US, to have, you know, magazines write an article or a review or newspapers, you know. So that's really difficult. And with this book, of course, From the Frying Pan to Meter Seal, I choose that name, by the way, because in Meter Seal ended the World War II stories of Fox Company. That was really where, for them, the engagements really ended. That's why I choose that as the name. And it started at the Frying Pan training in the US. Yes, of course, I hope that, you know, it gets some attention. But I'm working on that with the publisher, to have, make contacts in America and try to get reviews and attention. But I have a good friend, Carl Melantes, who wrote an epic book about Vietnam, Matterhorn, and it took him 25 years to get attention for his book before it became such a success. So, by the time I'm 85, I might have that success that Carl had and hopefully sell about 400,000 books that he did after trying to do so for 25 years. So,
well, I mean, none of us are in it. We'd like to make money out of it, but we're in it because we want to get history across. I mean, that's the thing is people,
that's the whole idea.
There are channels on YouTube raking in tens of thousands every month for doing stuff that's I don't think as worthy as what we're doing here. But what we're doing here is important because we're telling important stories. So, Jos, it's been a pleasure talking to you. My commiserations for having to go to the USA for something so sad, and for how that has brought to an end the chapter, because it means any future writing you do will have to be without the support of the veterans, because they've now passed on. It's an interesting phase we're arriving into, and I don't envy the job of the next generation of historians, because although they'll have perhaps better digital archives than we had, they'll have more resources to use. They won't be able to have those conversations with the guys who were there and just be able to look the men in the eyes and have them tell you what it was like. As you said there, Dan McBride, I didn't spend much time with Dan. I met him 2 or 3 times briefly, but obviously you got to know him very, very well. But that someone who has been there telling you how it was, no holds barred, no editing, that's important. So I'm glad you did the work. Yeah. So good luck with the book, Jos. I will. We got through the technical gremlins, and we will see you again, perhaps for a Baston show in the future.
Okay. Well, thank you for making time for it, Paul. I of course appreciate very much your interest with this book also, and hopefully this helps a little bit to get some attention all around the earth. That's the good thing with internet and YouTube, is that people can at least still see the show. Also, my part that I was trying to restart the computer, Murphy hits even in the middle of an interview. But, once I got that restarted, we were back online again. So I hope that people also enjoyed listening.
Arnhem Week has been a strange one. Guests not turning up, delays. It's like there's an irony about it being Arnhem Week. The operation that went wrong, my week went a bit wrong. But anyway, we got there in. So, Jos, thank you very much for joining us. And thank you, everybody, for watching. And, folks, I will see you all tomorrow for the beginning of Channel Islands at War Week. So cheers, everybody. See you next time. Bye.